seminars on domestic violence. It's a big deal.
Yeah. Maybe we get a bigger and better space too. Anyways, thank you all so much for coming. And it's a hard subject to go through. I had a sister who was abused terribly, and by her husband, he moved her and kept moving her, and made her a little smaller. And she finally got out, and I'm very excited. And I'm excited you got out, and you got out, and I'm so excited to have you here. I wish a lot more people were here, but I knew it was going to be a touchy subject.
Yeah.
So Joy Forrest and Elizabeth Stephenson are here. Joy, you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, I am the founder of Call to Peace Ministries, and we help women. We help families who are affected by domestic violence. We provide free counseling and support groups for victims and survivors. We're starting a support group next week, and we also try really hard to provide education, because when I was going through it, I kept reaching out to churches and pastors and counselors, and nobody knew how to deal with it properly. Everybody. They tried to do marital counseling, and it doesn't work at all in these situations, so it just seemed to get more and more complicated. It got worse instead of better. And so I have a passion to help people understand how to deal with it properly, because if you don't do the right thing, if you don't do it the right way, it's going to make things worse usually. So, and I am a survivor. I lived with it for 23 years and got out, but it was not physically abusive for the first 13 years, and then when it became violent, I learned to be tough for a little while, and it stopped for a little while, and then it started back towards the end, and at the end, I almost died from it. So, and then going through it again, nobody knows how to help me. In fact, I would even call the police, and they wouldn't show up because they were afraid of his weapons. They'd say, "Ma'am, does he have weapons?" I'll say,
Yes.
So I feel very blessed that I lived through it, and my children survived. We all survived, but it was hard, and it's like battle scars. You have battle scars, and so God really, for me, I feel like I've completely overcome it. But I see so many people. I met a lady last month at Toys R Us, and we got to talking about something, and she was telling me her story. She'd been married 30 years, and there was not a lot of physical abuse until the end, and she decided to leave him, and it became abusive, and he made an attempt on her life, and he ended up in prison. And she looked at me and she says, I'll never be with him again, but he goes with me everywhere I go. I just want to go move forward, and it's like I can't. I feel like I'm stuck, and he's just constantly with me, and I just want to be free. So that's what we're here, and that's what we're all about.
You have an amazing story. And we actually have had people come into the store too, and I've sent them to you, so that's wonderful. And Elizabeth, you do family law.
We do family law, with New Direction Family Law. It's so funny, well, not funny, haha, but I had two folks come in this week. One was a female and one was a male. And what people say to me all the time is he didn't hit me really hard, or he just pushed me, or he threw stuff at me, and they'll sort of blow it off. And you really have to have a come to Jesus meeting with them to say, it's not okay, it's a safe place, it's not okay to minimize, and walk them through the cycle and help them understand that. So part of what we do is help folks hook up with Interact if they can, and help them get and walk through the system on domestic violence protective orders. With the cautionary tale that it's a piece of paper, but it is the first step, and I know how scary that is for someone to have to go down to the courthouse and go in a courtroom and talk about these horrible things that happen. And so part of what we are is an advocate for people, not just a legal advocate, but an emotional advocate and a support for them.
How do you get them to come into you?
They call us. We can't reach out to them.
Because at that point, like if they've been abused for so long, they're beaten down. They don't
they're
have access
at the
to
point
money
where
to talk
either
to a lawyer.
the other party has left or wants to separate, or they finally made it sort of a decision in their head that something has to change. And a lot of times, both of these folks had just had babies. And so sometimes that gets their attention, and they're saying it stops with this on the Saturday night when dad comes in drunk and grabs the baby and closes the bedroom door, and you have to call 911. It's sort of a wake-up call for you.
It's usually a crisis.
Yeah, and that's and that's the most scary. That's the most scary time and the time when they are more likely to be killed or to be hurt when they try to leave, because that's their property, and I'm leaving and I'm going to stand up to you, and they're not used to that, so it's a really scary time for folks.
Now, growing up, I don't think anybody grows up and wants to be an abuser or wants to be abused. Are there certain personality traits for both sides?
Well, what Joy was just, actually I'll let Joy speak to that, but I have a master's in social work too, so I did an internship and worked a lot with domestic violence and especially with child abuse and neglect. So a lot of it is just, and Joy, you can speak to this, is power and control. You're my property. You got to do what I say. And a lot of times the person who's abusing has no other power in their life except over that person. There may be not have a high education. They may not be respected at work. And so when they come home, it's like they say, kick this, kick that, kick the dog, and as it goes down the line. So I think a lot of it is about power and control.
Yeah, it's really, if you look at this book, the Why Does He Do That? This to me was an eye opener, because all the years that I was in it, I kept thinking, and listen, mine was very well educated. He was a physician, so it doesn't necessarily have to do with that, but he was always a victim somewhere in his life. He had been picked on as a child and bullied. Well, who hasn't? And the only thing that I can think of is, he did grow up with abuse, but so did his siblings, and they didn't turn out abusive. So, his sense of entitlement is what, if you read this, you start thinking, well, is he doing it because, is this person, is he doing it because he's angry? Is he doing it because he's scarred? If you look at this guy's a psychologist, and he said after working with over 2,000 abusive men, he finally decided it's not because of mental illness, it's not because of some kind of childhood scar, and he went on down the list. It's because he believes that he's entitled. And like she said, he sees this person as property. And so for me, as an abused woman, to read this, I'm making all these excuses in my head, like, well, he really can't help it, he's been a victim all his life, and I thought he was the victim and I was not, and that he needed my help, and I thought, if I ever leave him, his whole life's gonna fall apart. He needs me. So talk about codependency. And so his life did sort of, he was not doing real well, but he somehow managed to survive. And again, as I see it in my counseling and everything else, it's there is a huge sense of entitlement that goes along with it. It is all about power. It's all about control. I own you, and you're going to do what I say. And folks in these situations feel like they have to just tiptoe around in order not to set them off. But you don't ever know what's going to set them off, because every time it seems like the rules change daily. Did you have that happen? I remember one time, I remember that we had had a long period of calm and quiet in my house, and that's another thing. People say, well, why don't you leave? Well, it's not always abusive. And there were good times, it seemed, but one day he was getting ready for work, and one of the daughters had used his hairbrush, and I mean, he went ballistic and just tore my house apart, just started throwing things across the, kicking the cat and, tearing up everything. He would always destroy my property when he got angry. And that was another thing it says in this book, is if he's really out of control, then why doesn't he destroy his own stuff? So, like, So, for me, it was such an eye-opener to realize this is not something that he can't control. This is something that he's choosing to do. And it hurts to admit that. It's hard. For me, it was, and in my counseling, that's one of the hardest things that women have to face, is to realize, I hear him say to me all the time, oh, I know he loves me, but I'm like, love doesn't act that way. That's not true love.
Yeah.
But you also have to understand, and a lot of people say to me, is that, and that's their world, that's their normal. So, having somebody come in and yell at you, or throw something at your head, or hit you, or, wine glass over your head, that's not a big deal, because that's what I'm used to. That's my normal. And so, and once they start seeing and get into therapy and get into counseling and see that's not normal, then that's when they can, I think, really start making some changes.
Or in my case, I wasn't battered. There's this, I hate the term battered woman, because I thought, well, I'm not a battered woman. I don't think he ever took his fist to me. He never punched me. And that was my idea when I thought of battered woman. So, yeah, he's kicked me, he's slammed my fingers into a drawer, he's yanked my arm and pushed me down, but he's never hit me. So,
Yeah.
I mean, you really, your mentality, when I go back and look, because I kept a journal all of those years, when I look at my journal, I'm like, man, I was crazy. But it's like this slow process where they slowly brainwash you to this, which wouldn't have been acceptable when you were dating. Over time, it's just like that old analogy of the frog. If you throw a frog in boiling water, they jump out. But if you put them in there and just turn up the heat a little bit at a time, they'll stay there till they boil to death. And that's kind of the way abuse goes. And I tell people getting, into it, that's why it's just very insidious. And so you don't even realize what's happening to you. It's such a process. Because nobody would ever walk into some a relationship where somebody's pounding them. And most of the time they're very charming. They tend to have dual personalities, so they can be, they could Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde syndrome, and they can look really good on the outside. And in fact, when my marriage fell apart, everybody's like, "Oh, I thought you were the perfect family." Yeah.
That's why I never judge somebody's relationship from the outside.
Yes.
You know, and you know both stories. But
And that's what women are afraid of a lot. It's like, because and that's something 99.9% of the time. But he'll get on the stand and he'll do great and he'll manipulate, and they present very well, and then you've got someone who's been isolated and been abused, and they're expected to walk into a courtroom, get on the stand, sit next to the judge, and the courtroom's full of people, and they're supposed to tell their story.
Yeah, and they're timid, and they're a lot of times they're a basket case. In fact, they've come to me. It's taken me over the years. I finally had to learn to go, wait a minute, because they don't seem stable a lot of times. They've been abused for who knows how long, and they seem less stable than the abuser a lot of times, which is why it fools counselors and it fools pastors, and so that's why we want to help folks to understand the dynamics behind it, because if you misunderstand if you don't see the dynamics, you're going to miss it.
Well, and then the major thing with that too is, because I literally lived exactly what you guys just said, is when there's kids involved too, like my kids were really little, like one of them was just a newborn.
Mm-hmm.
You're thinking, number one, this is my chance to speak up, and this is my chance to have an end to this. But then, if the jury doesn't go your way,
right,
you're also thinking in your head, okay, well, I better not take this too far, because
I might lose my kids.
not just that, but he might get off the hook.
Right.
And then he's going to come after
after
me.
you. That's right,
Yes.
because you can have an ex parte
in
order
my
in
case,
place.
it was
Right, and
it was like, do I just hope for the best and speak up, or do I just kind of play everything off like this was a big misunderstanding, because heaven forbid he gets off. And he actually did get off. I mean, he did about 18 months, and that was it. So you got to think, after 18 months was up,
right.
Now what?
Now what?
I feared
That's right.
for my life and my kids' life, and thankfully we moved out of state and everything else. But I've been that basket case, and actually weighing back and forth. Do I speak up, or am I coming across like I'm insane, because like you've literally been so anxious and
Yes.
scared and looking over your shoulder for so long. When you have finally separated yourself from this person, you have this period of time where you're away from him, you're waiting for the trial, because it's not like you leave this person, the trial happens the next day.
Right.
If there's a trial, if there's a whatever. In my
Right.
case there was. You're talking months went by before there was actually a trial with a jury, and so
in my
by the
case,
time you get to that point, you literally have lost your mind.
Right, and you're
So-
like you said, you're living in fear. For me, I finally got, back then they didn't have the mandatory arrest law,
Right.
and so they said, well, you've got to go down and you've got to fill out for a protective, or fill out a warrant for his arrest, and then get a protective order. So I go and I do that. And do you know how they served the warrant for his arrest? They posted it on his door and said, show up in court in a month, please. Do you know what that did? That infuriated him. So
Right.
then he was really on the
And like
warpath.
she said, it really is just a piece of paper, and those were his exact words when he was served with it. Were, do you really think a piece of paper is going to protect you? My ex actually said that verbatim to me. So when you said that, I mean, people think, okay, well, you've got an injunction of protection now. Like, sorry, but that doesn't
And you
mean
think
anything.
things
That is unfortunately the first step.
It's been 20 years for me.
20 years, and this
Right.
is what happened on Saturday night. Is the folks they lived together, but they just had a baby together, and the house was in the dad's name. So police came, and mom said, can you ask him to leave? Well, no, it's his house, you need to leave. And so he got to stay in the house, she's got a newborn, in the car, has, they didn't have a joint account, he had the account, he has the money, and that's the other issue is, a lot of times what we do with folks is help them plan. If I feel like they're safe and they're in a spot like that, then it's like squirrel away all the money you can find, go open your own bank account, get some credit, do that, because you're gonna have to survive, because the courts are not gonna order any money for you. They may put a protective order in place, but you're on your own after that, pretty much.
That's right, and that's one of the things that we do, cause I end up working with, victims a lot of times who are still in it, and I'm telling them the same thing, go open your own bank account, you need to be hiding some money, you need to make a plan for escape.
Right, get your birth certificates, get your credit cards, get your, like, make copies, put stuff away in a safe place and all that sort of
Yeah.
stuff.
Mhm.
You know, get an apartment if you can and
Yeah.
that kind of thing.
Well, you know, in a perfect world, it would be nice, you know, if the abuser would leave, because it's so, you know, here we're looking at women with 3 to 5 children, and they've gotta go out and find a place to live, and who's gonna let somebody stay? Even with me, when I separated from my husband the first time I had a child, and, my parents had divorced and remarried, and neither of my step-parents wanted a woman with a child. Oh, we can't put up that, we can't have that.
Especially one that was bringing possible danger into
Yeah.
their
That's
family.
right. That's exactly
So,
right.
yeah.
You know,
I
at my
know.
parents' house,
Mhm.
I brought the danger to them and then they
Yeah.
didn't, so,
Yeah.
yeah.
And then they got on, my ex got on the phone and started calling everybody in my family, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning. Did this happen?
Say what?
And just tell them how terrible I was, and that they, you know, and that they don't know the whole story, and you need to hear my side of the story. And he even called his own family, you know, because his family stayed close to me, and he called my niece, which was actually his niece, and he called at 3 in the morning, and his her husband said, "Don't you ever call here again." And sometimes just for those guys, it just takes somebody putting their foot down. He never called them again, because a lot of times these guys they really are full of a lot of
Yeah,
fear.
that's true.
They're insecure, and they do it, a lot of what they do out of insecurity, I think, too. But again, not an excuse.
So, how did you grow up? Did you have an abuse in your family beforehand?
No, my dad was, he was a pastor in my early years, and then, he left the ministry and went into counseling. I became a mental health counselor, psychologist, and, you know, besides the fact that he was sort of absent a lot, there really was no abuse. My parents, I never even heard them raise their voices. They were the kind that would clam up and not talk. So when my ex-husband yelled at me the first time, I went, "What is that? Who does that?" I was like, "No." But I do meet a lot of women who do grow up with abuse and they think it's normal. So, in fact, I feel like my daughters both thought that was normal and have been in and out of a lot of abusive relationships. I think they're getting steady now. It's been 20 years. But my younger daughter used to say, "But that one's so boring. He's so boring. All the normal guys were boring to her because you get so used to these ups and downs and the peaks and the valleys." So,
Is there a trait you see in certain women, too, or even men that get abused?
I don't think it's a
No.
trait per se. I think it's a grooming. It's just like sexual abuse. It's just
Yeah.
it's a quiet, steady control, and a lot of times they're not employed. They're stay at home. So it really it's slowly isolating and not
Yes.
letting them talk to their friends, or if they go out, they got the 500 text messages.
Mhm.
So it's not. I never think of it as a trait in the women. I don't think they've
Yeah,
done
no.
anything at all wrong. I think that they're just in a situation that they're scared and they don't know what to do.
Do you have advice for anybody that sees somebody else in a relationship like that? Because I think we all have sometimes like that's a little weird, or he's a little too controlling, and the other person doesn't want to listen. You know.
Right, and all you can do is offer and say, "I'm here," you know, and open the space, but you can't make somebody do what they don't want to do.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, a lot of times people will come in my office and then I give them advice and tell them what they need to do, and then they're just not ready yet.
Yeah.
just
They're
give
just
them
not ready.
options, because first of all, they've got somebody telling them what to do all the time, so they don't need somebody else to tell them, "You need to do this, you need to get out." In fact, I saw a lady when I was working at the domestic violence shelter get fired because she said, "You need to think about your children, you need to get out." She
Yeah,
started
yeah.
preaching at one of the victims, and she was gone the next day. I'm like, what happened I forgot her name, but anyway, so for me, it really was when somebody came in and tried to tell me, like, for some reason he had the right to tell me what to do, but nobody else did. And it upset me that anybody tried to tell me, but if they let me know I care about you,
Right.
and what helped me more than anything was hearing other people's stories. Like, I have a friend that, has been through this, and this is what she ended up doing. And that was even hard to find. I mean, people didn't talk about it back then. Listen, I'm anxious. So
Right.
20 years ago, there were even fewer resources than there are now, and I didn't want to go to a shelter. It was an hour away, leaving my community and all that stuff. So I didn't go there, and I rejected that advice to go there, and I really should have, because at least I would have gotten some information about the dynamics of abuse. But anyway, just because the one that was trying to get me to go to the shelter was like, you need to go, and I'm telling you, you need to go. It was like she was being bossy, and I'm like, there's absolutely no way. So don't do that.
I got somebody to do that to me already.
Yeah,
Exactly.
but if you can relay a story, you can borrow my story. I will tell you my story, and anytime. But that was the most helpful thing to me, I think. And even, I went to the bookstore and I found a book that was very
Right.
similar to this one back then. And for me to read, just resources, because I really felt like I need to understand, because I'm one of those people that likes to fix things, so I had to find out why. I had to analyze it to death, and then finally come into terms with, wait a minute, he's doing this because he's choosing to. And a lot of women will just run and they never try to figure it out, and then they find themselves in another situation just like it.
A lot of times you can say I say to folks, you're this, really think about, is this the model you want to set for your children of how a relationship and a marriage should be? And sometimes just putting that question out there makes them, no, actually it's not.
And for me, that was when it started affecting my children, because I really thought they didn't know what was going on. Because he never did anything physical in front of them. He was critical, and he was, mean and nasty, but he never laid a hand on me in front of them. And so I really thought that they were being shielded from it. And then one day, it was Christmas one year, the year right before I left, and my daughter had asked for a guitar, and we had a budget, and the guitar that I couldn't find one in our budget, because all the Christmas type that you give out were already sold out. And so the next one up was $500, and I wasn't going to do that. So I got her keyboard instead. And when she came down, she went, oh, you could tell she was disappointed. And I'm like, oh. And he goes, what? You don't like it? You don't like it? And he grabbed up the keyboard, and he went and got a trash bag out of the kitchen, and he started just putting all her Christmas gifts into the bag. And he goes, no gifts for you this year. And he took her, and he says, you go up to your room and you think about what you've done. I mean, all she did was show disappointment. He yanked her by the hair and pushed her. And then we ran upstairs, and my younger daughter, and then she was probably about 8 or 9. And we just sat on the bed, and she said, why does he have to be my dad? And that's when I thought, I gotta get out of this. So when it started affecting my children, I could put up with a whole lot from me,
Right.
but not from my children.
I
And it
think
wasn't
that's
long
a
after that,
great point.
we were out, yeah.
True.
And so that's a good thing to ask women, how is this affecting your children? And what's the effect gonna be?
And just like you said, they're young, they don't see it, they don't hear it, because
Yeah,
they're
it's
so
what we
really smart, and they know what's going on.
Yeah.
They really do. So.
Yeah. Looking back, she tells me all the things that she saw, and I'm like, oh, I'm so sorry. Hindsight is always 20/20. And again, it's all part of that process, that brainwashing that happened, because truly, I was not. By the time I'd been in it 20 years, my thinking was so distorted. I mean, I look back at my journals and I think, oh my goodness, I see how unbalanced it is now, but at the time it seemed perfectly logical. And it wasn't the way I was raised, so.
And you were married for a while. You said 13 years before any abuse
15.
happened.
Oh, well, no, we were,
Well, you were together for
We
13.
dated 8 years, yeah, and then we were married for another 5 before the first,
And you put him
physical
through medical
violence.
school.
yes.
So you're a smart, educated
He
And-
put me, well, we went through grad school together first, so I went to school before him, and then I put him through medical school. I was an audiologist back then.
So this can happen to anybody, any walk of life
Yeah.
too.
Yeah.
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 One socioeconomic,
Mhm.
absolutely not.
No.
Education or anything, it doesn't matter, it can happen.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen PhDs in these kind of situations. It really doesn't matter, and it's, I don't know what there really is no common thread, because it can happen to anybody, and it sort of sneaks up on you. Because in the beginning they are very charming and wonderful, and you've never been loved like that before, and they will sweep you off your feet, and they're usually there's some warning signs for abusive relationships. One is that they get attached very quickly, and they get serious very quickly, and they may want to get married right away, or, and within, I think we'd been going out a month, and he was talking about marriage, and I was 15, so I'm like, okay. But,
And they're pretty smart about sort of just choosing a victim. I mean, they sort of know what that personality is and what would be receptive to what they're putting
and
out
it's
there.
most of us who've learned to be peacemakers,
Mhm.
because that's what I was a peacemaker. We were, we never, we didn't fight and argue, and I was never taught to really stand up for myself either. But they're also very jealous, and that came out really early in the relationship. It was, well, who were your former boyfriends? What happened there? And then he just blew up when he found out, when he got my answer. So, and then we were just sitting in a restaurant one day, and he starts glaring at me, and I'm thinking, what's wrong with him? I could tell he's really angry, and I'm going, you okay? And he's not even saying anything. And we get out to the car, and I said, what's wrong? He goes, you know what's wrong? And I'm like, no, I don't. And finally, he says, I saw you staring at that man in the corner. And I'm thinking, I didn't even notice there was a man in the corner. But that's kind of like, that's really common. Checking up on you often. In this day and age, they say it's like constant texting. You're going to get
Or they know where you are on your phone.
Yeah.
I gotta find my phone on, and
Yeah.
they know exactly where they are. But I think what's important, my son's in high school, he's a freshman, and part of what they're doing in PE is talking about that, signs to look for in dating and violence and teens and that sort of stuff. So I think that's the really important thing that we need to start doing is,
Because it does start.
right, not wait
young.
till you're in it, but show you the signs and how to protect yourself when you're young.
It does start
And
young.
teach young men, how to.
So how do we change that misconception? Because like you and I both know, it can happen to anyone. I have 2 college degrees. I'm college educated as well, but there is such a misconception that it's only low income, that it's only stay-at-home moms, that it's only because that really is. There's high numbers in those demographics, but for you and I both, that really wasn't the case. So how do we change that misconception? Because I think there's a lot of women out there that are they're like you said, the battered woman. Well, that's not me. That's not me. I'm not in that category. I'm not a stay-at-home mom. I'm educated. It could still be happening to you, and I think a lot of women deny the fact that it's happening to them because they're so successful in every other area of their life that they can't. Like I had a hard time admitting that.
Well, it's embarrassing.
That this
I've had
wasn't
people
working.
that want to be involved with the ministry,
Yeah.
and then they're like, oh, I don't want my name out there. I don't want people to know. I'm like, they don't have to know that you went through it. It's just for you to be helpful to us.
Well, because there is that misconception. Nobody wants to say, oh, I've been through this or that, because then there is automatically for a lot of people this stigma, like, oh, well, you put yourself in that situation, or you allowed to let it go on, or you. And I got that a lot from a lot of people, and we've talked personally about how lucky I was to have my family and my church on my side. My pastor was the one that said, why didn't you pull the trigger when I didn't pull the trigger? So luckily I had that support, but there's still a lot of people, even now in my life, years later, that are just, how could you be, so stupid, kind of.
Yeah.
Well, that's why I'm doing what I'm doing, because I want people to know that it can happen to anybody, and it's not stupid
I think
people
that's the
that are the victims. I think what it is that people who like us, who have some education and have some resources. For example, I could go down to my bank and pull out $15,000, and I could live for a while. And a lot of the women that I see don't have those resources at all. But you know, so then I never appeared at the domestic violence shelter, and I tried not to call the police because I don't want to ruin his reputation, because if I cut off his
That's right.
income,
That's a
then I'm cutting
catch-22.
off my
That's right.
resources.
Oh my goodness.
It's like, it's a real catch-22. You're like, you say, I should put him in jail, but he's making $300,000 a year, and
Right.
that's where my income's
income
coming
is,
from right now, until I can get work again.
I think part of it is just doing what you're doing, you gotta educate people, and that's talking about it.
Yeah.
That's the only way you're gonna do it.
Well, and see, even with my education and what, I didn't have, disposable income at the time. My ex and I were, we were professional musicians, so it's not like we had a lot of disposable income laying around, so I've been there,
Well, it was still tough on me because I took that money and I thought I should have taken it all, because it took me
That's what I will
two
tell somebody,
years,
take
it took me 2
every
years to
penny.
get a settlement.
That's right.
And then when I got the settlement, it all went to lawyer fees. There was nothing left.
I remember sitting in my car one
So-
night, overnight, waiting for his, cause he did have like a part-time job, waiting for his direct deposit to go in at midnight on a
And going
Thursday
to get
night.
it, good for you.
And I remember sitting at that ATM for like 3 hours from midnight to like 2 in the morning or somewhere along with my dad. My dad went with me, and we sat there and like we checked probably every 10 minutes. And as soon as that money went through, I took every single
Good.
penny of
Good
it
for
out,
you.
And that's
because
the
I was
advice that I
completely
give.
broke. I had
Absolutely.
nothing, and that was, like you said, that was all we had. So
And I see that all the time, and see, that's another thing that we wanna do in the ministry, because, I mean, we are not here to take the place of safe space or interact, because, they're out there saving lives, and we want the people
Well, so are
after
you.
they've gotten,
So are you.
Yeah, we are, but, we wanna get them after that initial crisis. We don't we're not gonna deal with that initial crisis, but do you know that
So
women
they don't
and
go
children?
back to it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well,
They get their heads right.
well,
so
and
they
the other
don't go
thing
back.
is, but do you know that a woman can only stay at a domestic violence shelter for 3 months, and then where's she gonna go? And if she's been isolated and not allowed to work, and she doesn't have any finances, then what's she gonna do? I've seen so many go back because of a lack of funds.
Exactly.
And so we wanna be able to have some transitional housing down the road, that's one of our goals with Call to Peace, is to have up to 2 years transitional housing to help them move back into the workforce, to help them with childcare, because a lot of them are stuck at, if they go to work, even if they found a job,
I
when they got
know.
4 children, guess what? They can all go for childcare, so.
That's right.
I know women right now who are living in intolerable situations because they don't have any choices financially.
Yeah.
And it's really sad, so we wanna be able to help bridge that gap, in the long run. And, I mean, it's really an epidemic. I think people don't realize how widespread it is, because people like us, we keep silent. We don't say anything. I protected him, and that's why everybody was just so shocked when it all fell apart. Like, what? You guys were the perfect family, He used to do free medical clinics out of the house. And, so everybody thought we were so perfect, but, if I didn't speak up. And so then when it comes out, they're going like, well, what in the world? And I've had, I try to do trainings with pastors and counselors, and they're like, well, then all of, they don't tell me when they come in for counseling that there's abuse going on, and they won't. Because if you set a woman and a man, just like you
Together,
said,
absolutely.
together, she's not gonna tell
Not gonna say
the
anything.
counselor or the pastor, because she's afraid of what's gonna happen when she goes back home. And even if she goes up to a pastor, I've seen this happen, and says, you know what, my husband's abusing me, guess what? And the pastor turns around and tells the husband, it's just as bad as if she were in the room, because there are gonna be repercussions. So you've gotta be wise about how you deal with it.
And I just speaking to, what you're doing with your ministry, I think is why it's, you talked about bridging a gap, and I really think that's what you're doing with Call to Peace, which is amazing, taking because so many people turn to faith-based religion, whatever it may be, for a source of comfort and support and courage. But if you turn to that, and again, then you've got the pastor that then takes it back to the abusive partner, then you kind of lose that, or then there's the misinterpretation there, and it's a dead end. It goes nowhere. And so for you to take that and recognize that first of all, and then use your resources and your experience and your strength from that to turn that into something that's helping to bridge that gap is just huge. So that's very commendable. So thank you. I mean, it's
They'll just
stuff
help
like
me raise some funds for it.
Yeah.
You're like, don't applaud, just send money. So, no, and in talking about the church, that's another thing that I've seen, particularly as an issue, is that especially, in this area, the churches that I've been involved with, I have seen they're so dead set against divorce that they will they're like, no, you can't leave, no, you can't get out. No, you need, and I've even heard churches, they will say, well, you've got to submit, as long as he's not asking you to
Yeah.
sin, then you need to submit, and
Or in sickness and in health, he's sick, he needs help.
Mhm.
And then again, it's your job to fix him.
Is he
So-
still a doctor?
Uh-huh.
They're not still saying that, are they, at the churches? Wow.
Yeah.
Some of them.
You told me that a long time ago, but I didn't realize it was still going on.
It's still going on,
Mhm.
yeah. And so that's another thing. And so, God called me to seminary, people. it was like clear as the day. And when I went to seminary, I didn't really understand why I was going, but as I was in seminary, because I do believe, I believe that God can speak to people, and He does it through Scripture. And but the way that people twist it and use it, and I always knew it was wrong for them to be telling a woman, you've got to submit. And I'm thinking, but if she submits to him, then she's promoting his sin, right? If you're all about sin, then she's promoting the sin. So it took me till I got almost through with my seminary degree, and I took an ethics class, and they were talking about there are times that, even in Scripture, it says, thou shalt not kill, right? David killed Goliath, and that was a good thing, right? It says, thou shalt not bear false witness. And Rahab, who lied for the spies, was commended in the Hall of Fame in Hebrews. And so what they were saying, and what Jesus said, was that the law is summed up in two things: love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. And so if you're doing your actions, even if you're following the law, and they're not loving God and they're not loving other people, then it could be wrong. And so that was where, like in my ethics class, I finally figured out I can say to them, because she is not even loving her husband properly, because she's allowing him to keep on, she's promoting sin. She's promoting, it's like an enabler. She's enabling him. And so it's unethical for a woman, in my opinion, to submit to something like that. So I finally found the answer I was looking for, and how do you argue that from a biblical perspective for people who are very conservative and think that women have to submit to so many things. That was I came up with the answer finally. I'm like, yay! I was so excited about that class, because I had seen that way too many times. So.
I have a question. I have a young friend, a young woman that I've been mentoring for years, and I've watched her grow up, and she's just a sweetheart. She's dating a man for a few months, and the signs are there. I mean, she'll say to me, oh, well, we weren't really not getting along, so I went out with some girlfriends, and then she'll say, and he texted me, 30 times, and I'm just listening to it. And I know she's already withdrawn from other friends who have said to her, get away from this guy, and I don't want to, I don't know what to say to her, but it's hard to hear it.
I think wise questions, like, well, what if, do you think that that's normal, or why do you, I don't know that the why questions are good, but,
How does that make you feel when he texts you 30 times? I mean, he's obviously,
If the roles were reversed, what would you think of that?
right, exactly.
Why would you be texting him 30
30 times.
He's not,
Yeah.
would you ever do that? No. Why wouldn't you?
one of
I
the,
wouldn't want to bother him. Okay, well then that's not normal.
yeah, but something that would just make her think about it, and then if you can get some resources, or,
Mhm.
again, telling the story of somebody else. But my ex and I probably went to 20 counselors over the years that we were together, and I would say that most of it was not helpful. And but the two people helped me. One pastor who, I had a knife at my neck the night before, and I went to church, and I'm like, I know I'm supposed to submit, because see, I believed all that, that poor interpretation of Scripture. And I said, but I think he's going to kill me. And my pastor said, Joy, it says submit as is fitting in the Lord. This isn't fitting. This isn't what God has for you. And he let me know my life was more important than my marriage. But there's so many that put the marriage above the individual, which is not God's heart. And then the other one was a counselor who's actually working with my daughter, but then I think she gathered from my daughter some things were not so good at home. So she would spend like half the session with me, which was really a relief for me to talk. And she finally looked at me one day, and I didn't tell her anything about the physical abuse, or, I just told her about how critical, or, and I dressed it up to make it look as best, the best I could. And she looked at me one day, and she's a Christian counselor, and she said, why do you stay? And I thought, what do you mean, why do I stay? Divorce, God hates divorce, you know? I mean, I was like, that's how brainwashed I was, and my mentality was so rigid, you know, religious rigid. And so I'm so grateful that for what I went through, because it broke all the rigid. I mean, when you're completely broken and you realize, man, it didn't do anything but just set me up for a hard fall. But it really made me think when she asked me that. So finding a good question to ask, you know, from time to time can be make them think, because you can't say you need to watch out for this. You need
Right,
to.
right.
That's not going to work.
So legally, how do you get a woman out of the house? If she's going to a psychologist, doesn't the psychologist have that right to, like, I have to report this? There's
No.
abuse there?
Yeah,
No,
if it's
not
child
just-
abuse, they do, but if
Yeah,
it's
not an
adult
adult.
abuse, they don't have to, unless that person's gonna harm themselves or harm someone else. The person that they're seeing, not the other person. So a lot, you know, you can go and get, it's a civil order, it's a domestic violence protective order, and they do it ex parte, which means you go down to the courthouse, the other party does not know you're there. So you can get an order of protection, and then the other party is served with that, and they're ordered out of the house. And in 10 days, you go back, and both people get to put on their evidence. And so the problem becomes, okay, well, I'm sorry, you didn't show me enough. You have to show that you're in imminent fear of this person. Okay? And that's a subjective thing. And you've got a judge who's got 50 cases on the docket for the day, or had a bad morning, and said, no, I'm sorry, that just doesn't rise to that level. So your ex parte order is gone. He's allowed to come back to the house. There's nothing that keeps him away. And so you have to make plans for that as you're planning for the trial and the hearing. You have to plan on what happens if this order is not put back in place. You can't force somebody out of a house. Y'all both own it. Law enforcement's going to come. They're not going to throw anybody out unless they have some kind of domestic violence. So either you stay or you go. Those are your choices.
And what about money? Does that get...
They say, you know, when you go up in domestic violence court, the statute allows for them to order child support and alimony or post-separation support, but they never do. Never. I've never seen it happen. So a lot of times what you try to do is negotiate that out into a consent order that says you stay away from each other and you pay X amount of money, at least for the short period of time. But the courts, the judges I know in Wake County generally will not order it. So you can get him ordered out of the house. You've got your protective order, but the mortgage still needs to be paid. Car note needs to be paid. My cell phone needs to be paid. And it's going to take me 3 months to get you in front of a judge to get that to happen. So that's what I'm saying. If you're not in imminent fear that he's going to kill you or hurt you, and you can hang in there and make a plan, stash away some money, that's the best thing that you can do. But sometimes you just can't do that.
Is there any hope for legislature and, like, rules to be changed?
The law is there. They just don't enforce it. They just don't do it. I'm not getting into the money stuff.
Yeah, no.
I don't want to hear that.
But I think
today.
that's part of one of the reasons, like, people don't leave, you know? So
Absolutely, it's one of
Yeah.
the reasons. Are you kidding? Yeah. And legal aid can help you. There's legal aid, you know, but if you go to an attorney, I mean, that's an expensive proposition. It's the problem too.
Well, I've heard that legal aid won't help unless children are involved, or they won't help with child custody.
They won't help with custody, but they can put custody provisions in a protective order.
But they only they'll help if it's an abusive situation, but then they have to deem it abusive if they don't,
Right,
I've
right.
seen them, I mean, I know that they've turned down people that we've tried to get,
Right.
you know, oh, you should talk to legal aid. Well, no, they don't think that you're worthy. I don't know how it works, but.
I mean, you know, there's 500 people sitting on their doorstep, so they have to, you
Yeah,
know,
so
make
they're
some
real
decision in
picky
some
even
way.
at legal aid, so that's not always a given.
Right.
An
Yeah.
attorney is just not, so.
Elizabeth, can you speak to the, you know, for any of us that we might come in contact with that might be able to help on a personal level, kind of what that process is in going into domestic violence court, for Wake County at least, because I know they have a decent,
Yeah, we kind of
compared to a
actually
lot of
have
other
a
counties.
two courtrooms dedicated to domestic violence, and even Interact, they have a two-way system where the first part of the ex parte order, they can be at Interact, they don't even have to go down to the courthouse, which is I send people down there, even if they want to retain me, I say go see Interact first, and let them help you. But then you go into a courtroom, I don't know if y'all have ever been in a courtroom, but, it's, 100 people sitting in there, and they call your case, and you sit with your attorney, or not, and you go up on a stand, and you have to talk about all of your personal stuff in front of everyone. And you can lay it out there, and the other person gets up and be able to tell their story, and you've got a judge who spent 30 minutes or an hour with you, and gets to make a decision about whether you get an order or you don't. It's completely out of your hands, my hands, anybody's hands. So it's a big step, and if they don't get that order, it's really hard to get them to leave again or try to do something else
I
again.
know.
It's very
And
disheartening.
I've seen orders turned down that should have been.
Should have been, oh, absolutely.
Many times. There was a lady that came into the shelter when I was in Lewisburg, and her boyfriend pushed her out the car door and dragged her for like a mile. I mean, she was in the hospital for the longest time. Just had to have she had skin missing, and it was awful. She gets before the judge, and they're like, well, there's no proof that he did that intentionally.
And that's what it comes down to, is that he said, she said.
my God.
Because the only two people that saw it were you two. And who's more credible, and that's what it comes down to. The doctor, or the wife who's in trauma and anxiety ridden and sobbing and looks crazy. I mean, who are you gonna believe?
And that's one thing that when I'm working, and I know you probably do it too, is when I work with these women who are they're gonna be going to court, or even if they're trying to stay in the house and do what you
Right.
said, make a plan. I try to teach them to stop reacting. I'm like, I don't care if you're
Exactly.
screaming on the inside, I want you to be calm as you can around the general public. If you wanna freak out with somebody, call me and I'll let you
Right.
freak out in my ear, but I don't want you freaking out around the pastors, the counselors, and especially the judges, so
Right.
you have to learn, and that's hard, you know.
It's really hard. And I always suggest or make them go to a therapist. And you've just got to deal with all of that.
Mm-hmm.
You guys are wonderful. I can't thank you enough for being here, and I hope this reaches people.
Yeah,
It helps,
It does too.
yeah.
I mean, I know there's not a lot of people here tonight, but to me, there's one person sitting here, and that's one person that you touch that goes and talks with somebody else, who talks to
Mhm.
somebody else, who talks to somebody else.
Yep,
And we'll be on the YouTubes.
There you go. There you go. And we're gonna start. Well, then I'm gonna put a plug in for two things. Can I put it in?
Yes.
plugs?
Absolutely.
Yep.
So we're starting a support group for survivors of domestic violence. It's gonna start it's already next Thursday night at Hope Church in Raleigh, from 6:30 to 8. And they would have to go on our website, calltopeace.org, and sign up. And then we, in April, have a guy come in who's gonna be really awesome. His name is Chris Moles, and the lady that wrote this book, he does the circuit with her. They are pretty well known nationally, and we just sort of feel very privileged to have him, but he's gonna do some training on domestic violence, how to deal with it, how to recognize it, so it'll be a great resource for pastors and counselors especially, and anybody who wants to learn to deal with it better. So he's pretty, nationally known, and I hope that we can get a good crowd out for him. I hope this doesn't happen. But one thing I've learned over the years is, like, don't call it abuse. Just say, like what she's done here, the emotionally destructive relationship. Who hasn't been in one of those? And so we're gonna probably reword it some, because even most victims, like over the years that I've been dealing with it, most victims don't really see themselves as victims. I didn't see myself as a victim, and they don't consider what they're in domestic violence.
Right.
So I will call it a toxic relationship or something else, and then we'll get them out. So, anyway.
Anything else? All right.
Thanks, guys.
And what's the name of your law firm again?
It's New Direction Family Law, where we really do believe with change comes empowerment, that it's hard to make that change, but we help you get through it, and so that you can have the life that you want and deserve for yourself and your family. We really try to do it differently.
And I'm gonna put a plug in for her, because there's so few attorneys who even understand how to deal with domestic violence, and she's got a really good grasp, so I send people her way. I'll try to. And, but when I was dealing with it, they certainly didn't know how to deal with it, so.
Well, thank you all for coming.
Thanks.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.